everybody. Welcome back to um, Code Orange. We're going to read chapters 8 and 9 today. Let's start. Chapter 8. The drive to the country was brutal, alternating snow and rain. The farther north they went, the worse the roads were. Mitty was fine with the weather forecast, which was for more of the same. Rotten weather was a perfect excuse to watch TV all night and all day. He deserved it. But Friday night and Saturday morning, Mitty caught up on his sleep instead of sitting in front of the tube. He had barely finished waking up when his mom and dad put on the television to watch UConn play an afternoon game. The Blakes had high snack standards for TV sports, so the long, low coffee table was covered with food options. Mitty, having missed breakfast and lunch, examined his choices carefully. He skipped anything vegetable, just as he skipped girls who were vegetarians. People who didn't want to go get a hamburger were tiring. Mitty was mainly a chipster. First choice was cheese doodles because they turned his fingers yellow and then he could lick them clean for a second helping. Next choice, spicy hot potato chips with plain sour cream dip. Nothing vegetable ruining the dip like chives or anything. Third choice, long thin pretzels, which he never ate, but used to occupy himself during timeouts, building little log cabins all over the table. His favorite non-chip option was baby hot dogs in their own fat little wads of dough, piping hot from the oven. His mom had everything, which was always the case, he thought contentedly, still warm in the glow of being healthy as opposed to being a global scourge victim. Naturally, in such an atmosphere, UConn won. After the game, Mitty and his dad discussed the possibility of a driving lesson. Now, New York City restricted teenage driving, and basically, if you were 16, give it up. It was not a city for beginners. But Mitty's classmates were indifferent to driving anyway because they already had their freedom. With a Metro card, they could take a bus or a subway anywhere, and they did. A car, which eventually had to be parked, was not a plus in Manhattan. But in Connecticut, having a license mattered. His mother opposed the driving lesson. "The roads are slick," she said firmly. When Mitty and his dad went outside to assess the weather, they were forced to agree. But by the time they got back to the television, Mitty's mom had figure skating on. Neither Mitty nor his dad considered figure skating a sport. "How come we only have one television here?" Mitty asked. "Because in the country, we want to be a family," whispered his dad so he wouldn't drown out the TV commentary, "and do everything together." "Then together, you and I should seize the remote, Dad," Mitty whispered back, "and hold it hostage." Mitty's mom was giggling, but she wasn't meeting their eyes because she might give in and end up looking at a car race or even wrestling. She wrapped herself around the remote. Watching his mother, Mitty was seized by affection so intense that he had to look away. Mitty loved his family, but he didn't usually notice loving them. This kind of thing had been happening to him all week. Sunday morning, Mitty briefly considered doing homework. Luckily, he hadn't remembered to bring it along, so instead he drowsed happily, moving seamlessly from breakfast to brunch. He had barely put his dishes in the dishwasher when it was time to head back to the city. After having slept most of the weekend, Mitty also slept in the car. But once they were inside the apartment, Mitty came face to face with the fact that Sunday was followed by Monday. Mitty hated how this happened every week, how Sunday accelerated, leaping feet first into Monday, depriving a person of weekend joy. School really ought to start on Tuesday. He recalled now that he had meant to accomplish tons of things, freeing himself from his biology report and thinking up a no-effort topic for that English paper, and he summoned up some energy. He was down to the last two smallpox topics: ancient preventative techniques and vaccination supply. Olivia was never wrong, and he could probably put her in this bibliography for ancient preventative techniques, but Mr. Lynch wouldn't be amused, so Mitty went to work with his books and online to grab a few facts. He learned two. First, the arm-scraping technique of old Turkish slumber parties wasn't what Mitty had pictured. You didn't get a shot and then go on with your life. The Turkish technique actually gave you smallpox, except it was very mild. And the slumber party had to last for weeks because the kids had to be quarantined. They weren't very sick, but they were just as infectious as if they'd gotten the real thing. And anybody who caught smallpox from these kids did get the real thing. That, of course, was if it worked. But it didn't always work. Second, insufflation, which the Chinese had practiced, usually did not work. If it had worked, smallpox would have disappeared. Minnie's mouth got dry again. Then he read up on vaccine supply. The puzzle of why the government wanted vaccines when they weren't going to vaccinate anybody was solved. Mitty should have read this stuff earlier. In fact, he should have read everything earlier and in order and paying attention. His typing was worse than usual. Practically every word on his screen was highlighted because of spelling errors, and he didn't correct them. He just typed on. Nobody gets vaccinated for smallpox anymore, but we have a big supply of vaccine. If smallpox managed to reappear, probably due to terrorists getting a hold of the virus, doctors think that if they vaccinate an exposed person before the 4th day, maybe they can't stop the guy from getting smallpox, but he might have a less terrible case. But by the 4th day, the virus has taken over too many cells. It's too powerful. No vaccine would have an effect. There's no hope. Mitty hit print. He checked the time and date. Sunday, February 8th, 11:45 p.m. Subtract Sunday, February 1st, 4 p.m. A week had passed since Mitty Blake had handled and inhaled smallpox remains. No vaccine would have an effect, and there was no such thing as insufflation. At some point during his sleepless night, Mitty turned on the light. He felt an uncomfortable desire to wash his hands. This was pathetic. He had handled those scabs days ago. His bedroom was too quiet. He opened his window a few inches. Cold air leaped in and he froze, but it was worth it. Garbage trucks lifting and grinding all over the west side made a welcome racket. Then he went online, casually, as if just planning to check his mail. In fact, Mitty and his friends did not email all that much. They didn't phone either. They did a lot of text messaging. In middle school, Mitty had 54 best friends with whom he had routinely communicated. Back then, he knew everybody's screen name and even the people who had 2 or 3 of them, and if he didn't hear from somebody once a week, he was angry. In 9th grade, his list had diminished, and by 10th, it had narrowed to a handful. But this year, along with everything else he was not doing, he was not keeping in touch. Derek and Olivia were pretty much the extent of his buddy list. Even when he'd been a pretty decent student, Mitty had never been an Olivia, bursting with questions and answers. It seemed unlikely that he would ever fight for a first-row chair, wave his hand madly, and shout out opinions on British literature. But now, 3:15 on a Monday morning, he was online, and he was a person madly shouting out. He had already been to the sites of NIH, Homeland Security, and FEMA, Federal Emergency Management, in charge of the vaccine stockpile. Now he went to his favorite search engine to look for experts. ImmunoQuest turned out to be somebody's personal wellness site. ViroQuest was software. Gemunal.org was the journal of immunology, where you could read up anything for free, and Mitty was excited until he pulled up a title about smallpox. Targeting antigen and mature dendritic cells for simultaneous stimulation of CD4 plus and CD8 plus T cells. Right. The American Association of Immunologists wanted him to be a member before they would tell him anything, and Immuno.org was for sale. But the Clinical Immunology Society had a forum on infectious disease. Mitty wrote in the hope that they would post his question. Last week, researching a term paper on smallpox, I came upon actual smallpox scabs. Am I the only person except the CDC with smallpox remains? At ImmunoQuery, he typed in smallpox and was taken to a response page where he found a request submitted by a doctor. I wish to contact survivors of smallpox. I recognize there will be very few still alive in America, so hope to hear from survivors perhaps in Bangladesh or India. If you are a survivor or know of survivors, please email. Mitty wrote to her. I'm not a survivor, but I just found scabs from the 1902 Boston epidemic, which might interest you. Minnie had a number of email addresses. Sometimes he used whatabummer at AOL.com or mittb at hotmail.com. His school address was mblake at straff.edu. He rarely used that one because the only communications were from disappointed teachers. Even more disappointed now, probably, because he had never read their emails, never mind their assignments. To the International Infectious Disease Research Council, he submitted this. I just found smallpox scabs from a 1902 epidemic. Is it possible to extract variola virus from these scabs, and if so, how? To the science editors of the Boston Globe, I just found smallpox scabs from Boston's 1902 epidemic. Would anybody in a Boston medical school like to examine these and also help with my term paper? To the American Society of Infectious Disease Specialists, he wrote a different message. If a person stumbled on intact smallpox scabs and breathed in the dust from them and rubbed them against his nose and mouth, would that person be at risk? This was the question that mattered. But maybe he wouldn't send it. Minnie had come to a conclusion. When Donald Henderson's team, if you could call 10,000 health workers by the plain old word team, had ringed sick guys, they just waited out the illness. Those sick guys must have shed smallpox scabs all over their beds and blankets and houses. There would have been a zillion. But the World Health Organization guys just headed home. If scabs could actually pass on the disease, wouldn't they have had to sweep up the scabs each time? So it was stupid to worry. And that was why he wasn't writing to the CDC, who were way too official for stupid questions and had better things to do than worry about some kid's high school paper. Because that's all this was, a high school paper. Nothing more, nothing less. He was such a loser that he'd been scared of light and dark on Roosevelt Island. He was really a loser to be having smallpox nightmares. He'd better not become a doctor. He'd get every symptom of every illness in every textbook. Of course, with his grades, he wasn't getting into bartender school, never mind medical school. The best thing, Minnie decided, was to toss both the scabs and the book. This would end their crazy grip on him. He would flush the scab dust down the toilet, throw the book down the garbage shaft, and put this behind him. He picked up Principles of Contagious Disease to retrieve the envelope. As they had been doing all week, facts leaped off the pages and attacked. Prior to vaccination, 400,000 smallpox deaths occurred in a routine year in Europe, but only 1/3 of smallpox patients died, so the actual number getting smallpox was 1.2 million. And those guys were spread out, thought Minnie, with rivers and mountain ranges in between. They just sat there in their little feudal huts. They weren't catching the subway, 30,000 here and 20,000 there. Nothing separates New Yorkers from each other. Most epidemics, the book informed him next, were in winter. Smallpox spread better in cold weather. From the window, Minnie felt cold weather. And then he found the page where the envelope had been resting all those 102 years. It had discolored the page, leaving a rusty 2-inch by 6-inch patch. In this book, written by doctors who knew their smallpox, who had buried its victims, autopsied them, and slid their scabs into envelopes, it said, after a patient got well, not only should every surface in his room be disinfected, not only should his clothing and bedding be burned, not only should his furniture be destroyed, the wallpaper in that patient's room should be scraped off and burned. Minnie was strung out like a guy on his 10th cup of coffee. He put the book down. He forgot about getting rid of the envelope. In the silent dark, he padded to the kitchen and ate ice cream out of the carton. The chocolate felt good going down his sore throat. 12 to 14 days before a person is infectious, thought Minnie. Today is February 9th. Only a few safe days left. Unless this is some other strain of variola major, a quick strain, an infect you in 10 days strain. Minnie took the carton of ice cream into the living room with the fabulous skyline view. They never pulled a shade or a curtain in this room. Night and day, summer and winter, they had Manhattan for their neighbor. He finished the whole carton. At last, he slumped down on the pillows and dozed fitfully. In his bedroom, on the computer screen, The little flag of incoming mail began blinking. Chapter 9. Mitty never knew why he was in school on Mondays, but he really didn't know why he was in school this Monday. Classes felt like strange rituals devised by some unknown tribe. Desks and pencils, computers and hallways were alien objects. Friends were difficult to recognize and conversation was impossible. Nobody noticed. Derek talked about his favorite subjects. Teachers rattled on about their favorite subjects. Olivia chattered about her favorite subject. Mitty was silent, thinking about his emails. Would anybody answer? If they did, could he trust their answers? What would he do if the answers seemed to indicate that he, Mitty Blake, might actually be getting smallpox? He didn't feel as if he occupied his flesh in the usual way. His body was a container. He was standing inside it, like a person badly dressed. At lunch, Derek expounded on anthrax. Olivia offered to share her Rice Krispie marshmallow bar, but Mitty didn't want to touch it. He didn't want to touch anything. Are you all right? Olivia asked. He's fine, said Derek irritably. Olivia flushed. I am fine, thanks, Olivia, Mitty said. How sober his voice was. He could not inject with its usual... What is my usual? He thought. When school ended, Mitty stood in the foyer. He let his backpack slide to the floor, and he examined his palms. Lesions started at the extremities. Hands, head, and feet were first and worst. Mitty, what's wrong? Said Olivia, with her little frown of concern. He shoved his hands into his pockets. Don't you have to hurry to your ballet class? Yeah, but what's the matter? He changed the subject. Well, I wouldn't mind seeing you in tights. She beamed at him. I have a solo in the recital the first Saturday in March. He started to say I wouldn't miss that for anything, but this was not true. At home, in the safety of his bedroom, Mitty turned on his laptop and went online. He opened up mblake at straff.edu. 27 messages were waiting. He couldn't bring himself to open them. He got up and opened a real window instead. Studied traffic for a while, put on the radio, chose a soda. Then he double-clicked. R.E. Scabs. I am a science reporter for the Boston Globe. Where did you get those scabs? When can we do an interview? Phone, email, or if you're near Boston, let's meet. The science reporter just wanted an article. He wasn't nervous, wasn't afraid. R.E. Scabs. Your email was forwarded to me. I am a virologist at Harvard Medical School. When did you find this scab and how did you identify it? Email or call promptly. Did somebody with great credentials? So somebody with great credentials was interested, and he didn't sound nervous either. R.E. Scabs. I am with USAMRIID, the U.S. Army Medical Research Institute of Infectious Diseases. We need to examine the scab you have. Answer ASAP. R.E. Scabs. Thank you for contacting the International Association for Infectious Disease Research. IAIDR would like to obtain the scabs. Infectivity may have survived. Please call the phone number below or email immediately. Infectivity was the ability to infect. Infectivity may have survived, Mitty thought. Well, it didn't. If infectivity had survived, the Harvard guy would have said so. And then he thought, wait, I didn't write to USAMRIID. I didn't write to any government agency. I am not into authority right now. So somebody had forwarded Mitty's message. He had known for several days now that he was not in control of his body or his health, but somehow he had expected to be in control of his own questions. R.E. Scabs. Your email was forwarded to me. Where on earth did you find scabs of smallpox? How do you know that's what they are? Did you touch them? Call the hotline of your CDC. This was from a doctor in Germany. Mitty had written to sites with the word international in their title, but he figured international was just a word, like association or fellowship. But of course it wasn't, especially not on the web. R.E. Scabs. I am an infectious disease researcher with a collection of material related to epidemics. I would very much like to examine these scabs and possibly purchase them. When and where did you locate them? That was the sickest hobby Mitty had ever heard of. A guy who bought disease leftovers? But Mitty was drawn to sick people. Besides, this message was kind of fun, and Mitty felt in need of a little fun, so he wrote back. I'm the one with the smallpox scabs. The collector was online and answered in real time, which was a nice coincidence. I would do anything to get those. Mitty responded, I know some sick people, but you're out there, man. I'm a collector. Collectors are nuts. I own the lancet Edward Jennings used when he cut James Phipps's arm open for the very first vaccination. It looks like a switchblade made of a tortoise shell. Want to see it? Wouldn't a thing like that be in some important British museum? Thought Mitty. Or a medical school exhibit? When did you find the scabs? Wrote the collector. Last Sunday in an envelope inside an old medical text. You've been handling them for 7 days? You near a major medical center? Oh, I'm in New York. I'm near 50 major medical centers. Oh, I'm in New York too. Let's meet so I can get the scabs and you can see my other stuff. Mitty had a moment of caution. So kids in New York City had more independence by far than kids in suburbs. In suburbs, their moms had to drive them. In the city, kids learned to navigate on their own. They spent their childhoods getting safety lectures and holding hands and pairing up during school excursions. And when they walked out the door, into a vast city. Almost always, they were just fine. Almost. This guy, or woman, was maybe too weird to meet. Mitty abandoned him and opened the next message. R.E. Scabs. I'm an infectious disease researcher with a pharmaceutical firm and would be very excited to examine those scabs. If you live near me, I'll take you to our research facilities. We could use my scanning electron microscope so you can photograph virions of your very own scab. If you don't live near me, I'll find a colleague in your area. Dr. J.H.D. Redder. Mitty loved those 3 initials. Maybe instead of changing from Mitty Blake to Mitchell Blake, he'd become M.J. Blake. He found a paper and pencil and wrote M.J. Blake. Boring. It needed that 3rd initial. Mitty entertained himself with selections of initials. He'd always been fond of the letter X. M.X.J. Blake. Now, he doubled one of his initials. M.M.J. Blake. He liked it. Then he answered Dr. Rudder's email because although he had no idea what a scanning electron microscope was, it had to be better than the junk in the school science lab, and he didn't know what a virion was either, but photographs of his own virions would definitely one-up Nate. Dr. Rudder, too, was online at that moment and cruised right up with a response. Late afternoon was a pretty common time to be online because people were checking their end-of-the-day mail, but Mitty was a little surprised to have been reached by 2 in a row. It was like middle school when nobody had anything to do except communicate. When did you locate the smallpox scabs? Mitty and Dr. Rudder went through the same exchange of information he had gone through with the collector. Well, where are you? I'll find a lab with an SEM. New York, answered Mitty, which wasn't giving too much away. 8 million other people were in New York, too. Terrific. I'm at New York Presbyterian. I was just up there at the medical library, typed Mitty, and immediately regretted it. Dr. Rudder would expect a brilliant student to show up. Mitty wasn't one. He decided to bring Olivia along. I'll make you a 3D image of your specific virus on the SEM. Mitty thought, wait, you can't be with a pharmaceutical firm and also be with the New York Presbyterian, can you? I'll get back to you, he wrote. Mitty had a bad history of getting back to people at the best of times, but this guy was too eager. Mitty moved on. He was sorry he had emailed anybody. He couldn't be going around displaying his scabs like a sideshow and making appointments with people to schedule envelope openings. M. Blake. Thank you for contacting our site. We have a policy of not responding to questions from students doing papers. We suggest sites linked to this one. Same to you, thought Mitty. He was feeling pretty normal again. Sure, one outfit thought infectivity might have survived, and the doctor in Germany wanted him to call a hotline, but everybody else seemed pretty low-key. The next message was from the woman who had been looking for survivors. R.E. Scabs. I don't think the scab could be contagious after all this time. Viruses tend toward a shelf life measured in hours or days. But I don't know. I don't suppose anyone knows. I forwarded your email to the CDC. Meanwhile, please telephone me promptly to discuss this. If there is infectivity, it must be controlled. I need to examine the scabs in my laboratory. This was the only person whose responses he knew were real, because he had answered her. Everybody else could be insane guys with political problems, staying up all night and telling lies. If there is infectivity. R.E. Scabs. Your email was forwarded to me. How long have you had these scabs? Are they infectious? I guess not, or you'd be dead by now, and so would your country. How do you know they're smallpox? R.E. Scabs. Your email was forwarded to me. I'm a public health physician in Louisiana. A case of smallpox would take precedence over any health problem on Earth. Go to the CDC homepage and notify them that you've been exposed to dangerous material. R.E. Scabs. It's barely 3 years since we had an anthrax scare, and you're trying to start a smallpox scare? I forwarded your threatening email to the FBI. An email from Mitty Blake, bottom of the junior class at St. Raphael's, has been forwarded to the FBI? If the FBI and the CDC didn't have people reading stuff on Sunday night and Mondays were too busy, they'd read it on Tuesday. Well, first they'd figure out who M. Blake at straff.edu was. Government agencies could order a provider to hand over information, so the FBI would know in a heartbeat what straff.edu was. One called to St. Raphael's and they'd be told M. Blake's full name, address, phone number, and probably his grade point average and where his mother was born. Of course, now that he thought about it, pretty much everybody with half a brain would know that edu meant a school. They would separate Straff into St. Raph and come up with St. Raphael's. Probably several schools in America were named St. Raphael's, and he knew at least one hospital, but it wouldn't take long to narrow down. Even the guy in Germany must have guessed Mitty was an American because Mitty wrote in English and referred to a term paper. The FBI? Oh, come on. They had better things to do. A case of smallpox would take precedence over any health problem on Earth. In which case, no, the FBI would not have better things to do. "Hey, Mitt!" yelled his father. The front door slammed. Mitty shut down his email. "Mitty!" caroled his mother. "We're home! Do you want to order pizza? There's a UConn game tonight, Notre Dame. We're going to slaughter 'em." But Mitty Blake was playing a more serious game.